Well, we're here now. And it is officially starting the spooky season. And everyone likes the spooky season. If not, they should. I'm already having a few minor technical problems for some reason. And it's just very odd. But tonight, we're going to read some fairy tales. And if you saw my message, it might be considered spooky. Now, I know my VTube studio model is already acting up. I will blame that on the gremlins, perhaps. But as long as you can hear me, as long as you can see me, I'm still here. So to speak. But for now, we should probably go somewhere a little bit more appropriate. My model starts saying it. Come on, model. Next thing you know, I'll just vanish altogether. Well, now. That was interesting. But I had planned on bringing you all into the woods anyway. Although my model still seems to be frozen. So, let me see if I can fix that real quick. Hopefully it won't be gone. Okay. Maybe that'll help a little. Not, but we won't know until we try, will we? But anyway, we are doing Fairy Tales of a Slightly Darker Persuasion. The book I'm reading from itself is not outside of public domain. The stories in it, however, are, so I won't be using their art. But the book is Fearsome Fairies, Haunting Tales of the Fae, titled Strain. It is from the British Library, so all the folk and fairy tales that are in this one are based in the United Kingdom. I will try to get the pronunciations somewhat correct. Can't make any promises, though. And our first story for the night. The Banshee's Warning. Many a year before chloroform was thought of, there lived an old rambling house in Gerrard Street. So, a clever Irishman called Hereford met O'Donnell. After Hereford O'Donnell was entitled to write MRCS, for he had studied hard to gain this distinction, and the older surgeons at Guy's hospital considered him one of the most rising operators of the day. Having said chloroform was unknown at the time the story opens, it will strike my readers that if Hertford O'Donnell were a rising, successful operator in those days, of necessity he combined within himself a large number of striking qualities than are by any means to form a successful operator in these. There was more than a mere hand skill, more than even thorough knowledge of his profession, then needful for the man, dealing with conscious subjects, essayed to rid them of some of the diseases to which flesh is heir. There was greater courage required in the manipulator of old than is altogether essential in present. Then, as now, a thorough mastery of his instruments, a steady hand, a keen eye, a quick dexterity were indispensable to a good operator. But adding to all these things, there formerly required a pulse which knew no quickening, a mental strength which never faltered, ready power of adaptation in unexpected circumstances, a fertility of resource in difficult cases, and a brave front under all emergencies. If I refrain from adding that hard as well as courageous heart was an important item in the program, it is only out of deference to general opinion, which, amongst other strange delusions, clings to the belief that courage and hardiness are antagonistic qualities. Hertford O'Donnell, however, was hard as steel. He understood his work, and he did it thoroughly. But he cared no more for quivering nerves and shrinking muscles, for agonies of screaming, and faces of white with pain, and teeth clenched in the extremity of anguish, than he did for the stony countenance of the dead, which so often in the dissecting room appalled younger and less experienced men. He had no sentiment, he had no sympathy. The human body was to him merely an ingenious piece of mechanism, which it was at once a pleasure and a profit to understand. Precisely as Bernet loved the Thames Tunnel and other singular engineering feats, so O'Donnell loved a patient on whom he had operated successfully, more especially if the ailment possessed by the patient were of a rare and difficult character. And for this reason, he was much liked by all who came under his hands, since patients are apt to mistake a surgeon's interest in their cases for interest in themselves. And it was gratifying to John Diggs, plasterer, and Timothy Regan, laborer, to be the happy possessors of remarkable diseases, which produced a cordial understanding between them and the handsome Irishman. If he had been hard and cool at the moment of hacking them to pieces, that was all forgotten or remembered only as a virtue, when after being discharged from the hospital like soldiers who have served in a severe campaign, they met Mr. O'Donnell on the street, and were accosted by the rising individual as though he considered himself nobody. He had a royal memory, a stranger in a strange land, both for faces and cases. Unlike the rest of his countrymen, he never felt it beneath his dignity to talk cordially to Corduroy or First Street. In London, as at Kelgan, he never held back his tongue from speaking a cheery or kindly word. His manners were pliable enough, if his heart were not, and the porters and the patients and the nurses and the students at Guy's were all pleased to see Hertford O'Donnell. Rain, hail, sunshine, it was all the same. There was a life and a brightness about the man which communicated itself to those with whom he had come in contact. Let the mud in the burrow be a foot deep, or the London fog as thick as pea soup, Mr. O'Donnell never lost his temper, never muttered a surly reply to a gatekeeper's salutation, but spoke so blithely and cheerfully to his pupils and his patients, to the sick and to the well, to those who below and those above him. And yet, despite all of these good qualities, in spite of his handsome face, his fine figure, his easy address, and his unquestionable skill as an operator, the Dons, who acknowledged his talent, shook their heads gravely when 2 or 3 of them in private, in solemn conclave, talked confidentially of their younger brother. If there were many things in his favor, there were many more in his disfavor. He was Irish, not merely by the accident of birth. He might have been forgiven, since a man cannot be held accountable for such caprices of nature, but by every other accident and design which is objectionable to the orthodox and respectable to the representative English mind. In speech, appearance, manner, taste, modes of expression, and habits of life, Hertford O'Donnell was Irish. To the core of his heart he loved the island which he declared he never meant to revisit, and amongst the English he moved to all intents and purposes a foreigner, who was resolved, so said the great prophets at Guy's, to rush to destruction as fast as he could, and let no man hinder him. "He means to go the whole length of this tether," observed one of the ancient wiseacres to another, which speech implied a conviction that Hertford O'Donnell himself to the evil one. He determined to dive full length of his rope into wickedness before being pulled to that shore where even wickedness is negative, where there are no mad carousals, no wild, sinful excitements, nothing but impotent wailing and gnashing of teeth. A reckless, graceless, clever, wicked devil, going to his natural home as fast as in London as anyone possibly could speed there. This was the opinion of his superiors, held of the man who lived all alone with a housekeeper and her husband, who acted as butler, in his big house near Soho. Welcome in, guilty. Gerrard Street, made famous by De Quincey, was not then an utterly shady and forgotten locality. Carriage patients found their way to the rising young surgeon. Some great personage thought it not beneath them to fee an individual whose consulting rooms were situated on what were even then considered the wrong side of Regent Street. He was making money, and he was spending it. He was over head and ears in debt, useless, vulgar debts, senselessly contracted, and never bravely faced. He had lived at an awful pace ever since he came to London, a pace which only a man who hopes to and expects to die young can ever travel. Life, what good was it? Death, was he a child, a woman, or a coward, to be afraid of the hereafter? God knew about the trifle which had upset his coach, better than the Dons at Guy's. Hertford O'Donnell understood the world pretty thoroughly, and the ways thereof were to him as roads often traversed. Therefore, when he said that a day of judgment he felt certain he would come off as well as many of those who censored him, it may be assumed that, although his views of postmodern punishment were vague, unsatisfactory, and infidel, still his information as to the particulars of his neighbors was such as to console himself. And yet, living all alone, the old house near Soho Square gave thoughts would introduce into the surgeon's mind. Thoughts that were, to say, italicized by peremptory letters, and still more peremptory visits from people who wanted money. Although he had many acquaintances, he had no single friend, and accordingly these thoughts were received and brooded over in solitude, in those hours when, after returning from dinner, or supper, or congenial carouse, he had sat in his dreary rooms, smoking his pipe, and considering means and ways, chances and certainties. In good truth, he had started in London with some vague idea that as his life in it would not be of long continuance, the pace at which he elected to travel could be of little consequence. But the years since his first entry into the metropolis were now piled one on top of the other. His youth was behind him, his chances of longevity, spite of the way he had striven to injure his constitution, were quite as good as ever. He had come to that period in existence, to the narrow strip of tableland, whence the ascent of youth and the descent of age are equally discernible. When simply, because he has lived for so many years, it strikes a man as possible he may have to live for just as many more. With the ability of hard work gone, with the boom of companions scattered, and the capacity for enjoying convivial meetings were a mere memory. With small means perhaps, with no bright hopes, with the pomp and circumstance, the fairy carriages, and the glamour which youth flings over earthly objects, faded away like a pageant of yesterday, while the dreary ceremony of living has to be gone through today and tomorrow and the morrow after, as though the gay cavalcade and the martial music, glittering helmets, and prancing steeds were so accompanying the wayfarer to his journey's end. Friends, there comes a moment when we all must leave the coach, with its 4 bright bays, its pleasant outside freight, its cheery company, its guard whose horns blow merrily through the villages and along lonely country roads. Long before we reach that final stage, where the black business claims us for its own, its special property, we have to bid goodbye to all easy, thoughtless journeying, and betake ourselves, with what zest we may, to traversing the common of reality. There is no royal road across it that I have ever heard of. From the king on his throne to the laborer who vaguely imagines what manner of being a king is, we have to tramp across that desert at one period in our lives. At all events, that period usually is when, as I have said, a man starts to find the hopes and strength and the buoyancy of youth left behind, while years and years of life lie stretching out before him. The coach had traveled by drops here. There is no appeal, there is no help, therefore let him take off his hat and wish the new passengers good speed, without either envy. Behold, he has had his turn, and let whatsoever will mount on the box seat of life again, and tip the coachman and handle the ribbons. He shall take that pleasant journey no more, forever. Even supposing a man's springtime to have been cold and ungenial, with bitter easterly winds and nipping frosts, biting the buds and retarding the blossoms, still it was spring for all that. Spring with the young green leaves sprouting forth, with the flowers unfolding tenderly, with the song of birds and the rush of waters, with the summer before and the autumn afar off, and winter remote as death and eternity. But when once the trees have donned their summer foliage, when the pure white blossoms have disappeared, and the gorgeous red and orange and purple blaze of many-colored flowers fills the garden, then, if there come a wet, dreary day, the idea of autumn and winter is not so difficult to realize. When once 12 o'clock is reached, the evening and night become facts, not possibilities. And it was the afternoon, the evening, and the night. Redford O'Donnell sat thinking on the Christmas Eve, when I crave permission to introduce him to my readers. A good-looking man, ladies considered him. A tall, dark-complexioned, black-haired, straight-limbed, deeply, divinely blue-eyed fellow, with a soft voice, with a baroque presence, who had ridden like a centaur over the loose stone walls of Conmera, who had danced all night in the Dublin halls, who had walked with the Benalbluma mountains, gun in hand, day after day, without weariness, who had fished in every one of the 100 lakes you can behold from the top of that mountain near Recess Hotel, who had led a mad, wild life in Trinity College, and a wilder, perhaps, while studying for doctor, as the Irish phrase goes, in Edinburgh, who, after the death of his eldest brother, left him free to return to Kelvin and pursue the usual utterly useless, utterly purposeless, utterly pleasant life of an Irish gentleman, possessed of health, birth, and expectations. Suddenly kicked over the paternal traces, bade adieu to Culloden Castle, and the blandishments of a certain beautiful Miss Clifton, beloved of his mother, and laid out to be his wife. Walked down the avenue without even so much company as he assumed to carry his carpet-bag, shook the dust from his feet at the lodge gates, and took his seat on the coach, never once looking back at Culloden, where his favorite mare was standing in the stable, his greyhounds chasing one another around the home paddock, his gun at half-cock in his dressing room, and his fishing tackle all in order and ready for use. He had not kissed his mother, or asked for his father's blessing. He left Miss Clifton, arrayed in her brand-new riding habit, without a word of affection or regret. He had spoken no syllable of farewell to any servant about the place. Only when the old woman of the lodge bade him good morning, and God blessed his handsome face, he recommended her bitterly to look at it, for she well would never see it again. 12 years and half passed since then, without neither Nancy Blake or any other one of the Culloden people having set eyes on Master Hertford's handsome face. He had kept his vow to himself. He had not written home. He had not been indebted to mother or father for even a 10-pence piece during the whole of that time. He had lived without friends. He had lived without God, so far as God ever lets a man live without him. One thing only he felt to be needful: money. Money to keep him when the evil days of sickness or age or loss of practice came upon him. Though a spendthrift, he was not a simpleton. Around him he saw men who, having started with fairer prospects than his own, were nevertheless reduced to intelligence, and when that what had happened to the others might happen to himself. An unlucky cut, slipping on a piece of orange peel in the street, the merest accident imaginable, is sufficient to change opulence to beggary in one life program of an individual, whose income depends on eye, on nerve, on hand. Besides the consciousness of the fact, Hertford O'Donnell knew that beyond a certain point of his profession, progress was not easy. It did not depend quite on the strength of his own bow or shield whether he counted his earnings by hundreds or thousands. Work may achieve competence, but mere work cannot, in a profession at all events, amass fortune. He looked around him, perceived that the majority of great men, great and wealthy, had been indebted for their elevation, more to the accident of birth, patronage, connection, or marriage, than to personal ability. Personal ability, no doubt, they possessed, but then little Jones, who lived in Frith Street, and who could barely keep himself and his wife and family, had ability too, only he lacked the commitments of success. He wanted something or someone to puff him into notoriety. A brother at court, a lord's legitimate, a rich wife to give him prestige in society, and an abundance of something or someone. He had grown gray-haired and faint-hearted while laboring for the world which utterly despises its most obsequious servants. Clatter along the streets with a pair of fine horses, snub the middle classes, and drive over the commonalty. That is the way to compass wealth and popularity in England, said Hertford O'Donnell bitterly. And as the man desired wealth and popularity, he sat before his fire, with a foot on each hob, and a short pipe in his mouth, considering how he might best obtain the means to clatter along the streets in his carriage, and splash plebeians with mud from the wheels like the best. In Dublin he could, by means of his name and connection, have done well, but then he was not in Dublin, neither did he want to be. The bitterest memories of his life were inseparable from the name of the Green Island, and he had no desire to return to it. Besides, in Dublin, heiresses were not quite so plentiful as in London, and an heiress, Hertford O'Donnell had decided, would do more for him than years of steady work. A rich wife could clear him of debt, introduce him to a fashionable practice, afford him that measure of social respectability which a medical bachelor invariably lacks, deliver him from the loneliness of Gerrard Street, and the dominion of Mr. and Mrs. Coles. To most men, deliberately bantering away their independence for money seems so prosaic a business that they strive to gloss it over to themselves, and to assign every reason for their choice, save that which is really the influencing one. Not so, however, with Hertford O'Donnell. He sat beside the fire scoffing over his proposed bargain, thinking of a lady's age, her money-bags, her desirable house in town, her seat in the country, her snobbishness, her folly. That would be a fitting ending, he sneered. And why I did not settle for the matter tonight passes my comprehension. I am not a fool to be frightened with old women's tales, and yet I must have turned white, I felt I did, as she asked me whether I were ill. And then to think of my being such an idiot to ask her if she had heard anything like a cry, as though she would likely tell her that. He with poor Parville blood, which I often imagined must have been mixed with some of her father's strong pickling vinegar. What the deuce could I have been dreaming about? I wonder what it really was. And Hertford O'Donnell pushed his hair back off his forehead, and took another draught from the too familiar tumbler, which had placed conveniently on the chimney-piece. After expressly making up my mind to propose, too, he mentally continued, could it have been my conscience, the myth, which somebody who knew nothing about the matter said, makes cowards of all of us? I don't believe in conscience, and even if there was such a thing capable of being developed by sentiment or consultation, why should it trouble me? I have no intention of wronging Miss Janet Price Ingot, not the least. Honestly and fairly I shall marry her. Honestly and fairly I shall act by her. An old wife is not exactly an ornamental article of furniture in a man's house, and I do not know that the fact of her being well gilded makes her look any handsomer. But she shall have no cause for complaint, and I will go and dine with her tomorrow and settle the matter. Having arrived with that resolution, kicking down the fire and burning hollow with the heel of his boot, knocking the ashes out of his pipe, emptied his tumbler, and bethought him it was time to go to bed. He was not in the habit of taking his rest so early as 11:45, but he felt uneasily weary, tired mentally and bodily, lonely beyond all power of expression. Janet would be better than this, he said, half aloud, and then, with a start and a shiver, and a blanched face, he turned sharply around, whilst a low, sobbing, wailing cry echoed mournfully through the room. No form of words could give an idea to the sound. The plaintiveness of an Aeolian harp, that plaintiveness which as soon affects and lowers the highest spirits, would have been wildly gay in comparison to the sadness of the cry, which seemed floating in the air. As the summer wind comes and goes among the trees, so that mournful wail came and went, came and went, came like a rush of sound, like a gradual crescendo managed by a skillful musician, died away in a lingering note so gently that the listener could scarcely tell the exact moment when it faded into utter silence. I say faded, for it disappeared as the coastline disappears in twilight, and there was total stillness in the apartment. Then, for the first time, Hertford O'Donnell looked at his dog, and beholding the creature crouched into the corner beside the fireplace, called upon him to come out. His voice sounded strange, even to himself, and apparently the dog thought so too, for he made no effort to obey the summons. "Come here, sir," his master repeated, and then the animal came crawling reluctantly with his hair on end, his eyes almost startling from his head, trembling violently as a surgeon who caressed him felt. "So you heard it, Brian," he said to the dog. "And so your ears are sharper than Miss Ingott's, old fellow. It's a mighty queer thing to think of, being favored with a twist visit for Banshee at Gerrard Street. And as the lady has traveled so far, I only wish I knew whether there was some refreshment she would like to take after her long journey." He spoke loudly and with a certain mocking defiance, seeming to think the phantom he addressed would reply. But when he stopped at the end of his sentence, no sound came from the stillness. There was a dead silence, only broken by the falling of cinders in the hearth and the breathing of his dog. "If my visitor would tell me," he proceeded, "for whom this lamentation is being made, whether for myself or some member of the illustrious family, I should feel immensely obliged. It seems too much for honor for poor surgeon to have attention paid him. Good heavens, what is that?" he exclaimed as a ring, loud and peremptory, woke all the echoes in the house, and brought his housekeeper in a state of distressing dishabille out of her warm bed, as she subsequently stated, to the head of the staircase. Across the hall, Hertford O'Donnell strode, relieved at the prospect of speaking to any living being. He took no precaution putting up the chain, and he flung the door wide open. A dozen burglars would have provided welcome in comparison with the ghostly intruder he had been interviewing. Therefore, as has been said, he threw the door wide, admitting a rush of wet, cold air which made poor Mrs. Cole's few remaining teeth chatter in her head. "Who is there? What do you want?" asked the surgeon, seeing no person, and nearing no one. "Who is there? Why the devil can't you speak?" When even this polite exhortation failed to elicit an answer, he passed out into the night, looked up the street and then down the street, to see nothing but the driving rain and blinking lights. "If this goes on much longer, I shall soon think I am either mad or drunk," he muttered, and he re-entered the house, locked and bolted the door once more. "Lord's sake, what's the matter, sir?" asked Mrs. Holmes from the upper flight, carefully only to reveal the borders of her nightcap to Mr. MacDonald's admiring gaze. "Is anybody killed? Have you to go out, sir?" "It was only a runaway ring," he answered, trying to reassure himself with the explanation he did not in his heart believe. "Run away? I'd run away them," muttered Mrs. Coles, as she retired to the congenial couch where Coles was, to quote her own expression, "snoring like a pig through it all." Almost immediately afterwards, she heard her master ascend the stairs and close his bedroom door. "Madam will surely be too much for a gentlewoman to intrude here," thought the surgeon, scoffing even at his own fears. But when he lay down, he did not put out his light. It made Brian leap up and crouch in the coverlet beside him. The man was fairly frightened, and would have thought it no discredit to his manhood to acknowledge as much. He was not much afraid of death, and he was not afraid of trouble. He was not afraid of danger, but he was afraid of the Banshee. As he laid with his hand on his dog's head, he recalled the many stories he had been told concerning his family retainer in the days of his youth. He had not thought about her for years and years. Never before had he heard her voice himself. When his brother died, she had not thought it necessary to travel up to Dublin and to give him notice of the impending catastrophe. If she had, I would have gone down to Calgan and perhaps saved his life, considered the surgeon. I wonder who this is for. If for me, that will settle my debts and my marriage. If I could be quite certain it was either of the old people, I would start tomorrow. Then vaguely his mind wandered on to think of every Banshee story he had ever heard in his life. About the beautiful lady with the wreath of flowers who sat on the rocks at Blow Red Castle, and the County Antrim crying till one of her sons died for love for her. About the round chamber at Dunluss, which was swept clean by the Banshee every night. About the bed of a curtained great house in Ireland, which was slept in constantly, though no human being had ever passed in or out after dark. About that general officer who, the night before Waterloo, said to a friend, "I've heard the Banshee and shall not come off the field alive tomorrow. Break the news gently to poor Carey," and who, nevertheless, coming safe off the field, had subsequently news that poor Carey had broken entirely, pitifully to him. About the lad who, aloft in the ringing, though hearing the night of sobbing and wailing coming over the waters, went down to the captain and told him he was afraid they were somehow out of their reckoning, just in time to save the ship, which, when morning broke, they found, but for his warning, would have been on the rocks. It was blowing great guns, and the sea was full and fret of turmoil. They could sometimes see the trough of waves down in the valley, and the cruel black reefs they had escaped. On deck the captain stood speaking to the boy who had saved them, and asking how he knew of their danger. And when the lad told him, the captain laughed and said her ladyship had been outwitted that time. But the boy answered, with a grave shake of his head, that the warning was either for him or his, that if he got home safe to port, there would be bad tidings waiting for him from home, whereupon the captain bade him to go below and get some brandy and lie down. He got the brandy, and he lay down, but he never rose again, and when the storm abated, great calm succeeded the previous tempest. There was a very solemn funeral to see. On their arrival at Liverpool, the captain took a journey to Ireland to tell the widowed mother how her only son died, and to bear his few effects for the poor desolate soul. And Hertford O'Donnell thought again about his own father riding full chase across the county, and hearing as he galloped a clump of plantations something like sobbing and wailing. The hounds were in full cry, and he still felt, afterwards expressed it, that there was something among those trees he could not pass, and so he jumped off his horse and hung the reins over a branch to a Scotch fir, and beat the cover well, but not a thing could find it. Then for a time in his life, Miles O'Donnell turned his horse's head from the hunt, and within a mile of Calgan, he met a man running to tell his brothers a gun had burst and injured him mortally. And remembered the story also of how Mary O'Donnell, his great-aunt, being married to a young Englishman, heard the Banshee as she sat one evening waiting for his return, and of how she, thinking the bridge of which she often came home unsafe for horse and man, went out in a great panic to meet him and entreat him to go around the other road for her sake. Sir Everard was riding along the moonlight, making straight for the bridge, when he beheld a figure dressed in white coming across it. Then there was a crash, and the figure disappeared. The lady was rescued and brought back to the hall, but next morning there were two dead bodies within its walls, those of Lady Ayrton and her stillborn son. Quicker than I write them, these memories chased one another through Hertford O'Donnell's brain, and there was one more terrible memory than any which would have reoccurred to him, concerning an Irish nobleman who, seated alone in his great house in London, heard the Banshee and rushed out to get rid of the phantom, which wailed in his ear nevertheless as he strode down Piccadilly. And then the surgeon remembered how that nobleman was with a friend to the opera, feeling so sure that there were no Banshee unless she had a box, could find admittance, till suddenly he heard her singing amongst the highest part of the scenery, with a terrible mournfulness and a pathos which made the prima donna's tenderest notes seem harsh by comparison. As he came out, some quarrel arose between him and the famous fire eater against whom he had stumbled. As a result, in the next afternoon, there was new Lord, Vice Lord, killed by a duel with Captain Bravo. Memories like these are not amongst the most enlivening possible. They are apt to make a man fanciful, unnervous, wakeful, and as time ran on, Hartford O'Donnell fell asleep with his candle still burning, and Brian's cold nose pressed against his hand. He dreamt of his mother's family, the Hertfords of Ardenbury, far-off relatives of Lord Hertford, so far off that even Mrs. O'Donnell had no clue of the genealogical maze. He thought he was at Atbury fishing, that it was a misty summer morning, the fish were rising beautifully. In his dreams he hooked one after another, and the boy who was with him threw them into the baskets. At last there was one more difficult land. The boy, with his eagerness to watch for the sport, drew nearer and nearer to the brink, while the fisher, intent on his prey, failed to notice his companion's danger. Suddenly there was a cry, a splash, and the boy disappeared from sight. The next instant he rose again, however. Then, for the first time, Hartford O'Donnell saw his face. It was one he knew well. In the moment he plunged into the water and struck out for the lad. He had him by the hair, and was turning to bring him back to land when the stream suddenly changed into a wide, wild, shoreless sea, where the billows were chasing one another with mad, demonic mirth. For a while O'Donnell kept the lad and himself afloat. They were swept under waves and came up again, only to see larger waves rushing towards them. And through all, the surgeon never loosened his hold, till a tremendous billow, engulfing them both, tore the boy from his grasp. With the horror of his dream awoke him, he heard a voice saying, quite distinctly, "Go to the hospital at once." The surgeon started from the bed, rubbed his eyes, and looked around. The candle was flickering faintly in its socket. Brian, with his ears pricked forward, had raised his head at his master's sudden movement. Everything was quiet, but still those words were ringing in his ear. "Go to the hospital at once." A tremendous peal of the bell overnight. The sentence seemed to be simultaneous. He was wanted at Guy's, wanted imperatively. Came O'Donnell like an inspiration. Neither sense nor reason had anything to do with the conviction that roused him from out of bed, made him dress as speedily as possible, and grope his way down the staircase, Brian following. He opened the front door and passed out into the darkness. The rain was over, the stars were shining as he pursued his way down Newport Market, and thence winding in and out of the east-southeasterly direction, through Lincoln's Inn Fields, an old square, to Chancery Lane, whence he proceeded to St. Paul's. Along the deserted streets he resolutely continued his walk. He did not know what he was going to Guy's for. Some instinct was urging him on, and he neither strove nor combat nor to control it. Only once did the thought of turning back cross his mind. That was at the archway leading into the old square. There he paused for a moment, asking himself whether he were not gone stark, raving mad. But Guy's seemed preferable to the haunted house on Jarrett Street, and he walked resolutely on, determined to say, if any surprise were expressed at his appearance, that he had been sent for. Sent for? Yeah, truly. But by whom? On through Cannon Street and over London Bridge, where the lights flickered in the river, and the sudden plash of the water flowing beneath the arches, washing the stone tiers, could be heard. Now the human dim was hushed and lulled to sleep. Thinking of many things, of days in his youth, his dead brother, of his fatherly, heavily encumbered estate, of his fortune his mother had vowed she would leave to some charity rather than to him, if he refused to marry according to her choice, of his wild life in London, the terrible cry he had heard overnight, that unearthly wail which he could not drive from his memory even when he entered Guy's and confronted the porter, who said, "Have you been sent for, sir? Did you meet the messenger?" Like one in a dream, Hartford O'Donnell heard him. Like one in a dream, Also, he asked what was the matter. Bad accident, sir. Fire. Fell off the balcony. Unsafe. Old building. Mother and child. Son. Child with compound fracture of thigh. This, the joint information of porter and house surgeon, mingled together and made a boom in Mr. O'Donnell's ears, the sound of the sea breaking on a singly shore. Only one sentence he understood properly. Immediate amputation necessary. At this point he grew cool. He was careful, cautious, successful surgeon in a moment. Child, you say? He answered. Let me see him. The guy's hospital of today may be different than the guys of Hertford O'Donnell loved you. Railways here, I believe, swept away the old operating room. Railways may have changed the position of the former accident ward, to which, in a few days of which I am writing, 2 surgeons had to pass the staircase leading into the upper stories. On the lower step of the staircase, partially in shadows, Hertford O'Donnell beheld, as he came forward, an old woman seated. An old woman with streaming gray hair and attenuated arms, with head bowed forward, with scanty clothing, with bare feet, who never looked up at their approach, but sat unnoticing, shaking her head and wringing her hands in extremity of despair. "Who is that?" asked Mr. O'Donnell almost involuntarily. "Who is what?" demanded his companion. That woman," was the reply. "What woman?" "There, are you blind? Seated at the bottom step of the staircase. What is she doing?" persisted O'Donnell. "There's no woman near us," his companion answered, looking at the rising surgeon very much as though he suspected him of seeing double. "No woman," scoffed Hartford. "You expect me to disbelieve the evidence of my own eyes?" And he walked up to the figure, meaning to touch it. But as he essayed to do so, the woman seemed to rise in the air, and float away with her arms stretched high over her head, uttered such a wail of pain, agony, and distress as caused the Irishman's blood to curdle. "My God, did you hear that?" he said to his companion. "Hear what?" was the reply. Then, although he knew the sound had fallen on deaf ears, he answered, "The wail of the Banshee. Some of my people are doomed." "I trust not," answered the house surgeon, who had an idea, nevertheless, that Hartford O'Donnell's Banshee lived in a whiskey bottle, and would at some point not remove to make the day end of a rising and clever operator. With nerves utterly shaken, Mr. O'Donnell walked forward to the accident. There, with his face shaded from the light, lay his patient, a young boy, with a compound fracture of the thigh. In that ward, in the face of actual danger, a pain capable of relief, the surgeon had never known faltering or fear. Now he carefully examined the injury, felt for the pulse, and inquired as to the treatment pursued, and ordered the sufferer to be carried to the operating room. While he was looking out his instruments, he heard the boy lying on the table murmur, "Tell her not to cry, so. Tell her not to cry." "What is he talking about?" O'Donnell inquired. "The nurse says he's been speaking about some woman crying ever since he came in. His mother, most likely," answered the attendants. "It is delirious, then," observed the surgeon. "No, sir," pleaded the boy excitedly. "No, it is that woman, the woman with the gray hair. I saw her looking for the upper window before the balcony gave way. She has never left me since. She won't be quiet, wringing her hands and crying." "Can you hear her now?" Stepping to the side of the table. "Point out where she is." The lad then stretched forth a feeble finger in the direction of the door, where clearly, as he had seen her seated on the stairs, the surgeon saw the woman standing. A woman with gray hair, scanty clothing, and upstretched arms and bare feet. "A word with you, sir," O'Donnell said to the house surgeon, drawing him back to the table. "I cannot perform this operation. Send some other person. I am ill. I am incapable." "But," pleaded the other, "there's no time to get anyone else. We sent for Mr. West before we troubled you, but he was out of town, and all the rest of the surgeons live so far away. Mortification may set in at the moment, and—" "Do you think you're required to teach me on my business?" was the reply. "I know the boy's life hangs on a thread, and that is the very reason I cannot operate. I'm not fit for it. I tell you, I've seen something tonight which unnerves me utterly. My hand is not steady. Send for someone else without delay. Say I am ill, dead, what you please. Heavens! There she is again, right above the boy. Do you hear her? And Hertford O'Donnell fell fainting to the floor. How long he lay in that death-like swoon I cannot say, but when he returned to consciousness, the principal physician of Guy's was standing beside him in the cold gray light of the Christmas morning. "The boy?" murmured O'Donnell faintly. "No, keep yourself quiet," was replied. "The boy," he repeated irritably. "Who operated?" "No one," Dr. Kenton answered. "It would have been utterly cruelty. Mortification set in. Hertford O'Donnell turned his face to the wall, and his friend could not see it. "Do not distress yourself," went the physician kindly. "Huntington says we could not survive the operation in any case. He was quite delirious from the first, raving about a woman with gray hair and—" "No," Hertford O'Donnell interrupted. "The boy had a mother, they told me, or I dreamt it." "Yes, she was bruised and shaken, but not seriously injured." "Is she blue eyes and fair hair? Fair hair all rippling and wavy? Is she white as a lily with just a faint flush of color in her cheeks? Is she young and trusting in innocence? No, I won't. She must be nearly 30 now. Go, for God's sake, and tell me if you can find a woman who can imagine having once been a girl such as I describe." "Irish?" asked the doctor, and O'Donnell made a gesture in assent. "Glad to see, then," was the reply. "A woman with the face of an angel." "That woman should have been my wife," the surgeon answered. "Whose child was my son." "Lord help you!" ejaculated the doctor. Then Hertford O'Donnell raised himself from the sofa where he had laid him, and told his companion the story of his life, how there had been a bitter feud between his people and her people, and how they were divided by old animosities and by difference of religion, and how they had met by stealth and exchanged rings and vows, all for naught, how his family had insulted hers, and so that her father, wishing for her to marry a kinsman of his own, bore her off to a faraway land, and made her write a letter of eternal farewell, how his own parents had kept all knowledge of the quarrel from him till she was utterly beyond his reach, how they had vowed to discard him. Useless, he agreed to marry according to the wishes. Now he left his home, and came to London, and pushed his fortune. All this Hertford O'Donnell repeated, and when he had finished, the bells were ringing for morning service, ringing loudly, ringing joyfully. Peace on earth and goodwill towards men. But there was little peace that morning for Hertford O'Donnell. He had to look on the face of his dead son, wherein he beheld, as though reflected, the face of the boy in his dream. Afterwards, stealthily he followed his friend, and beheld, with her eyes closed, with her pale cheeks impinged, her hair thinner, but fallen like a veil over her, the love of his youth, the only woman he had ever loved devotedly and unselfishly. There was little space left here to tell how the two of them met at last, or how the stone of the years seemed suddenly rolled away from the tomb of their past, and the youth arose and returned to them, even amid their tears. She had been true to him through persecution, though contumely the kindness, which was more trying. Through shame and grief and poverty, she had been loyal to the lover of her youth. Before the new year dawned, there came a letter from Kelvin saying that the Banshee's wail had been heard there, and praying Hertford, if he were still alive, to let bygones be bygones, in consideration of the long years of estrangement, the anguish and remorse of his afflicted parents. More than that, Hertford O'Donnell, if a reckless man, was an honorable, and so, on the Christmas day when he was so to have proposed to Miss Inget, he went to that lady and told her now how he had wooed one, in the years of his youth, one who after many days miraculously restored to him. From the hour in which he took into her confidence, he never thought of either vulgar or foolish, but he paid homage to the woman who, when she had heard the whole tale repeated, said simply, Ask her to come to me till you can claim her. And God bless you both. Wow. So, the Banshee was seeing multiple people at the same time. That story, that's a bit long. 3 minutes before the ads are going to start. So I'm going to go ahead and start the ads. I'll see you in a bit. So, if you can still hear me, do you hear both the fire and the rain? So if you notice, it is actually raining. Because I literally wanted it to be a dark and stormy night. Can't fire up a little. Not so high that they're meeting my voice out. There we go. How's that sound? Oh. Come on, freaking model freeze again. What the hell? That's responding. I'm going to attempt once more to fix this issue. Okay. Maybe it'll work for the rest of the night. Only got another hour. We'll get more story taken care of. Great. So our next... Okay, I'll break. I break down and stretch. our second story for the night. Laura Silverbell. In the 5 Northumbrian countries, you will scarcely find so bleak, ugly, and yet in a savage way so picturesque a moor as Dardale Moss. The moor itself spreads north, south, east, and west, a great undulating sea of black peat heath. What we may term its shores are wildly with birch, hazel, and dwarf oak. No towering mountains surround it, but here and there you have a rocky knoll rising among the trees, and many wooden promontory of the same pretty but utterly wild forests running out of its dark level. Habitations are thinly scattered in this barren region, and a full mile away from the meanest of the stone cottage of Mother Clark. Let not the southern reader who associates the ideas of comfort with the term cottage mistake. This thing is built of shingle, with low walls, its thatch is hollow, and peat smoke curls stingingly from its stunted chimney. It is worthy of its savage surroundings. The primitive neighbors remark that no rowan tree grows near, nor holly, nor bracken, and no horseshoe is nailed on the door. Not far from the branches and hazels that straggle about the rude wall of the little enclosure, on the contrary, they say, you may discover the broom and the ragwort, in which witches mysteriously delight. But this is perhaps a scandal. Malkark was for many the sage femme of this wild domain. She was renounced practice, however, for some years, and now, under the rose she dabbles, it is thought, in the black art, in which she has always been secretly skilled, tells fortunes, practices charms, and in the popular esteem is little better than a witch. Mother Clark has been away to the town of Wilderham to sell knit stockings, and returning to her rude dwelling by darkness. To her right, as far as the eye can reach, the moor stretches. The narrow track she has followed there tops the gentle upland, and at her left a sort of jungle of dwarf oak and brushwood approaches its edge. The sun is sinking blood-red in the west. His disk has touched the broad black level of the moor, and his parting beams glare athwart the gaunt figure of the old beldame, as she strides homeward, stick in hand, bringing to relief the folds of her mantle, which gleam like draperies of bronze image and lightning fire. For a few moments, the air floods with light. Tree, gorse, rock, bracken glare, and then out of it, gray twilight of evening. All is still and somber. At this hour, the simple traffic of the thinly peopled country is over. Nothing can be more solitary. From the jungle, nevertheless, through which the mists of evening are already creeping, she sees a gigantic man approaching. In that poor and primitive country robbery is a crime. She therefore has no fears for her pound of tea, her pint of gin, and 16 shillings in silver, which she is bringing home in her pocket. There is something that would have frightened another woman about this man. He is gaunt, somber, bony, dirty, dressed in a black suit, which a beggar would hardly care to pick out of the dust. This ill-looking man nodded to him as he stepped on the road. "I don't know you," she said. Again. "I never seen you in here," she exclaimed sternly. "Fine evening, Mother," he says, and holds the snuff box towards her. She widened the distance between them by a step or so, and said sternly and pale, "I have not seen to thee. Who are you, beast?" "You know Laura Silverbell?" That's a buying 'em. Less is nigh 'em than are you, she answered, looking straight before her. One name's as good as another for one that was never christened. How you know that? She asked grimly. For it is a received opinion in that part of the world that the fairies have power over those who have never been baptized. The stranger turned on her with a malignant smile. There is a young lord in love with her, the stranger says. And that will have her at your house tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. You must stick crosspins right through the candle, as you have done for many times before, to bring her lover thither by tale, and her fortune's made. Take this for your trouble. He extended his long finger and thumb towards her, the guinea temptingly displayed. I have naught to do with ye. Never said thee before. Get thee away. I earn nae gold to thee, and I take none. Away with thee, or I'll find out and make thee. The old woman had stopped and was quivering in every limb as she thus spoke. He looked angrily, and sulkingly turned away from the words and strode slowly towards the wood from which he had come. And as he approached it, he seemed to grow more taller and taller, and stopped into the high as a tree. I can see that there would be something to it, she said to herself. Farmer Lou must get done either Sunday, not Oppie. The old Farmer Lou was one of the sect who insists that baptism shall be at once administered, and not until the Christian candidate has attained to adult years. The girl had indeed for some time been of age, and not only according to his theory, to be baptized, but, if needed to be, married. Her story was a sad little romance. A lady who some 17 years before had come down and paid Farmer Lou for 2 rooms in the house. She told him that her husband would follow her in a fortnight, and that it was meantime delayed by business in Liverpool. And 10 days after her arrival, her baby was born. Margaret was a sage family occasion, and on the evening of that day the poor young mother died. No husband came, no wedding ring, they said. So, about £50 was found in her desk, which Farmer Lou, who was a kind old fellow and had lost 2 children, put in bank for the little girl, resolved to keep her until her rightful owner should step forward and claim her. Hey, Michael. What were you reading tonight? I found half a dozen love letters signed Francis, calling the dead woman Laura. So Farmer Lou called the little girl Laura. Her subsequent of Silver Bell was derived from a tiny silver bell, once gilt, which was found among the poor mother's little treasures after her death. and which the child wore in a ribbon around her neck. Thus, being very pretty and merry, she grew up in the North Country farmer's daughter. And the old man, as she needed more looking after, grew older and less able to take care of her, so she was, in fact, nearly her own mistress, and did pretty much in all things that she liked. Old Moll Clark, by some caprice for which no one could account, cherished an affection for the woman, who saw her often, and paid her many a small fee in exchange for the secret indications of the future. It was too late when Mother Clark reached her home to look for a visit from Laura Silverbell. About 3 o'clock next afternoon, Mother Clark was sitting knitting with her glasses on, outside her door on the stone bench, when she saw the pretty girl mount lightly at the top of the stone to her left of the birch, against the silver stem of which she leaned her slender hand, and called, "Mo, Mother Clark, are you all alone by yourself?" "Aye, Laura, lass, we can be cursed and cruel if you want a word with me," says the old woman, with a mysterious nod, beckoning her stiffly with her long fingers. The girl was, assuredly, pretty enough for a lord to fall in love with. Only look at her. A profusion of brown, rippling hair, parted low in the middle of her forehead, almost touched her eyebrows, and made a pretty oval of her face by the breadth of that rich line long marked. What a pretty little nose, what scarlet lips, large, dark, long, fringed eyes. Her face was transparently tinged with those clear amarillo tints which appear in deeper eyes in her wrists and the backs of her hands. There are beautiful gypsy tints in which the sun dyes young skin so richly. The old woman's eyes saw this, and her pretty figure, so rounded and slender, and her shapely little feet, placed in thick shoes that can't hide even their comely proportions, as she stands on the top of the stile. But it was with the dark and saturn aspect. "Come, lass, what stand you atop of the wall for? Or folk may chance to see you. I have a thing to tell ye, lass." She beckoned her again. "I have a thing to tell thee, Lau." "Come hither," said the old woman purportedly. "But you munna gonna give me the creepins," make me tremble. "I wanna look into the glass of water, mind ye." The old woman smiled grimly and changed her tone. "Now, honey, get thee down and let me see the canny face." And she beckoned her again. Laura Silverbell did get down and stepped lightly towards the door of the old woman's dwelling. "Tak this," said the girl, unfolding a piece of bacon from her apron. "But I have a silver sixpence to give ye, and when I'm done, I'll give ye hymen." They entered the dark kitchen of the cottage, and the old woman stood by the door, lest their confidence should be lighted at the surprise. "Before you begin," said Mother Clark, Sufferer, waitress, "I tell you there's ill folk watching you. What's that old farmer do about it? He doesn't get to sir to baptize you. If he lets the Sunday next pass, I'm afraid you'll never get sprinkled with no sign of the cross while there's a sky aboon us." "Golly!" exclaimed the girl. "Who's looking after me?" "A big black fellow, as high as the Kipples, came out of the wood near Dead Man's Crack, just as the sun gazed down over yonder. I knew who he was, and his feet never touched the road while he made it as if he walked beside me. And he wanted to give me snuff first, and I couldn't have that. And then he offered me a golden guinea, but I was no a spy. And to bring you here tonight, and cross a candle with pins to call your lover in. And he said he's a great lord, and in love with you." "You refused him?" "Well, for thee, I did, lass," said Mother Clark. "Why, it's every word true," cries the girl vehemently, starting at her feet, for she had seated herself on the great oak chest. "True, lass? Come say what you mean," demanded Moll Clark, with a dark and searching gaze. "Last night I was coming home from the wake of old Farmer Dykes and his wife and his daughter Nell. When he came to the stile, I bid them good night, and we parted." "And you came by the path alone at the night time, did ye?" exclaimed old Park sternly.
I wasn't afeard. I don't know why. Pathfinder lames down by the old Waltz's house of castle.
Ah, well, and dothly pass is. You'll keep indoors for a night so well, and you'll rue it. What you see?
No freedom, mother. Not I was feared on.
You heard it was calling your name?
I heard not that it was a dow, but the bully howl in the old castle was,
Answered the pretty girl.
I heard no said nothing's down, but mickle that's conning bletsome. I heard singing and laughing a long way off. I considered and I stopped a bit to listen. Then when I walked a step or two, and there enough was a piebald ball field. Under the castle was, not 20 steps away, was set a grand company, silks and satins, and men with little velvet coats and with gold faces striped all over them, and ladies with necklaces that would dazzle you, and fans big as girdles, and powdered footmen, like there was all Sheridan behind his coach. Only these were 10 times as grand.
There was a full moon last night, said the old woman.
So bright it would blind you to look at it,
Said the girl.
Never an ill sight, but the devil finds light,
quoth the old woman.
There's a running brook there. You were on this side, and they were on that. Did you try to make you cross over? God, it didn't. Not but civility and kindness, though. But you mun let me tell it my own way. There was laughing and talking and eating and drinking out of long glasses and gold cups, seated on the grass, and music was playing, and I kicking behind the bush of all the grand doings, and they gets a dance, and says a tall fellow I didn't see before. You mun step across and dance with a young lord that's fond of love with you here. That's myself. And sure enough, I kicked him under the lashes, and conny lad he is, and to my taste. Though he was dressed in black, with sword and sash and velvet twice as fine as they sell us in that shop at Goodwin Friars. And kicking at me again from the corners of his cane. And the same fellow took me to mad love with me. And his father was there, and his sister, and they came all the way from Castine Castle that night to see me, and there was the other side of the Golden Friars.
Damn that sorcerer!
Come, master, no muffin. Tell me true. What was he like? Was his gray face grim as sat a tall fellow with the wide shoulders? That looked like an ill thing, with black clothes amongst rags. His face was long, but not real featured, and darker than not a gypsy, and his clothes were black and grand and made of velvet. And he said he was the young lord himself, and he just looked like it. That would be the same fellow as said at Goodman Strike,
said Bart with
Good, mother, how could that be?
cried the lass, with a toss of her pretty head and a smile of scorn. But the fortune teller made no answer, and the girl went on with her story.
When they began to dance,
Continued Laura Silverbell,
they urged me again, but I wouldn't step over, just partly pride, because I wasn't dressed fine enough, and partly contrariness and something. But God, I wasn't not a foot. No, but I'm more than half wished it all the time. Well, for these 1,000 dustna across the brook. Hoity-toity, why not? Keep a ham after nightfall, and don't ye be walking by yourself by daylight and let young some ways till after they're baptized, said Maltbark. I'm like the first to be married. Take care that marriage won't hang you in the bell ropes, said Mother Kirk. Leave me alone for that. The young lord said he was my staff to love with me. He wanted me to give a conny ring and a beautiful stone in it. But drat it, I was a wicked aspie and wouldn't take it. And he is a young lord. Lord, indeed, you're daft to dream it. These fine folk, what are they? I tell you, darbies and fairies, and if they don't do you as you bid, they'll take you, and you'll never get out of their hands again while grass grows.
said the old woman grimly.
Out with it, replies the young girl impatiently. Who's daft and dreaming new? I'd been dead with fear if 'twas such a thing. How couldn't it be? Always loathsome and bonny and shapely. Well, and what do you want me on, lass?
Asked the old woman sharply.
I want to know, here's sixpence, what I should do,
Said the young lass.
It'd be a pity to lose such a morrow, eh? Say your prayers, lass, I can't help ye,
says the old woman darkly.
If you go with the people, you'll never come back. You might talk with them and weep with them, no eat with them and drink with them, no take a pin's worth by way of a gift from them. Mark well what I say, or you're lost.
The girl looked down, plainly much vexed. The old woman stared at her with a mysterious frown steadily for a few seconds.
Tell me, lass, and tell me true. Are you in love with that lad? What should I?
Said the girl with a careless toss of her hair, blushing up with her red temples.
I see how it is,
said the old woman with a groan, and repeated the words, sadly thinking and walking up the doorstep or two, and looked jealously around.
The lass is witched! The lass is witched! Did you see him since?
Asked Mother Clark, returning. The girl was still embarrassed, and now she spoke in a lower tone and seemed subdued.
I thought I saw him as I came here, walking beside me among the trees, but I can say it was only the trees themselves, like was running one behind another as I walked on. I can tell you now, lass, what I told you before,
answered the old woman simply.
Get your ham, and don't delay on the way, and say your prayers as you go, and let none but good thoughts come to you. Put ne'er a foot aside the store stand again until you get to be christened, and get that done next Sunday.
With this charge, given with grisly earnestness, she saw over the stone, stood upon it watching her retreat, till the trees quite hid her path of view. The sky grew cloudy and thunderous, the air darkened rapidly as the girl, fret little by Mama Clark's view of the case, walked homeward on the lonely path of the trees. A black cat, which had walked close by her, for these creatures sometimes take a ramble in search of prey among the woods and thickets, crept from under the hollow of an oak, and again was with her. It seemed to grow bigger and bigger as the darkness deepened, and its green eyes glared as large as halfpennies, with her affrighted vision of the thunder came booming along the heights of the low-wooded road. She tried to drive it away, but it growled softly, and set its way back up as if it would spring it. Finally, it skipped into a tree where they grew thickest at each side of her path, and accompanied her high overhead, hopping from bough to bough as if meditating to pounce upon her shoulders. Her fancy being full of strange thoughts, she was frightened, and she fancied that it was haunting her steps, destined to undergo some hideous transformation the moment she ceased to guard her path with prayers. She was frightened for a while after she got home. Dark looks of Mother Clark were always before her eyes, and secret dread prevented her from passing the threshold of her home again that night. The next day it was different. She got rid of the awe which Mother and Cake had inspired her. She could not go into the dull, dark-featured lord in the black velvet dress out of her head. He had taken her fancy, and was growing in love with her. She could think, nothing else. Bessie Hannock, a neighbor's daughter, came to see her that day, and both still walked towards the ruins of Haworth Castle to gather blaeberries. So off the two girls went together. In the thicket, along the slopes of the ivied walls of Haworth Castle, the companions began to fill their baskets. Hours passed, and the sun was sinking near the west, and Lara Silverbell had not come. Over the hatch of the farmhouse door, the maids leaned over and stretched out legs, watching for the sign of the girl's return, wondering, as the shadows lengthened, what had become of her. At last, just as the rosy sunset gilding began to spread the landscape, Bessie Hannock, weeping into her apron, made her appearance without her companion. Her account of their adventures was curious. I will relate the substance of it more connectedly than her agitation would allow her to give it, and without the disguise of rude Northumbrian dialect. The girl said that as they got along together, the brook that bounds at Pine Mag, she saw suddenly a very tall, big-boned man, with ill-favored, besmirched face, and dressed in worn, rusty black, standing on the other side of the stream. She was frightened, and while looking at his dirty, wicked, starved figure, Laura Silverbell touched her, gazing at the same tall scarecrow, but with a countenance full of confusion, even rapture. She was peeping through the bush behind which he stood. With a sign, she said, "This nigh comely lad, a boy, see this bonny velvet clothes, sword and sash, that's a lord, I can tell ye, and I will know who he foes, who he loves, and who he'd wed." Bessie Hancock thought her companion daft. "See how lovesome he looks," whispered Laura. Bessie again looked and saw him gazing at her companion with a magnificent smile, and at the same time he beckoned her to approach. "Now retire, go not near him, he'll wring thy neck," gasped Bessie, bringing her, as she saw Laura step forward with a look of beautiful bashfulness and joy. She took the hand he stretched across the stream, more for love of the hand than any need of help. And the moment was crossed at his side, and his long arm about her waist. "Fare thee well, Bunny, I've gained my ways," she called, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Tell good Fighter Lou I'm gained my ways to be happy, and maybe, at long last, I'll see him again." With a farewell wave of her hand, she went away with her dismal partner, and Laura Silverbell was never more seen at home, or among the commons or the wigwams, the bonny fields and bosky hollows by Meadowlands. Bessie Hannock followed them for a time. She crossed the brook as though they seemed to move slowly enough, but she was obliged to run to keep them in view. She was 9 times called for them continually. Come back, Bonnie Laurie!" Till, getting over a bank, she was met by a white-faced old man, and so frightened was she that she thought she had fainted outright. At all events, she did not come home to herself until the birds were singing their vespers in the amber night twilight. No trace of the direction of the girl's flight was ever discovered. Weeks and months passed, and more than a year. At the end of that time, one of Moll Clark's goats died. She suspected by the hideous practices of a rival witch who lived far regarding loss. All alone in her stone cabin, the old woman had prepared her charm to ascertain the author of her misfortune. The heart of the dead animal, stuck all over with pins, was burnt in the fire, the windows, doors, and every other aperture of the house being first carefully stopped. After the heart, thus prepared with suitable incantations, is consumed by the fire, the first person who comes to the door or passes by it is the offending magician. Mother Clark repeated these lonely rites at night. It was a dark night, with a glimmer of the stars only, and a melancholy night wind is soothing and slow to scatter the winds as whipped around. After a long and dead silence, there came a heavy thump at the door, and a deep voice called her by name. She was startled, but she expected no man's voice. Peeping from the window, she saw, in the dim light, a coach, 4 horses, with gold-laced footmen and coachmen in wig and cocked hats, turned out as if for a state occasion. She unbarred the door, and a tall gentleman dressed in black, waiting at the threshold, entreated her, as the only femme sage within reach, to come to the coach and to attend Lady Lairdale, who was about to give birth to a baby, promising her a handsome payment. Lady Lairdale, she had never heard of her. "How far away is it?" 12 miles, the old girl told the friar. Her avarice was roused. She steps into the coach. The footman claps the door. The glass jingles with the sound of a laugh. A tall, dark-faced gentleman in black, seen opposites. At a furious pace, it turned out to the road to the narrower, dark, with thicker, loftier forests than she was accustomed to. She grows anxious, for she knows every road and bypath of the county road. She has never seen this one. He encourages her. The moon has risen above the edge of the horizon. She sees the noble old castle. Its summit of tower, watchtower, and battlement glimmers faintly in the moonlight. This was their destination. She feels a sudden, all but overpowered by sleep. But although she nods, she is quite conscious of the continued motion, which has become even rougher. She makes an effort and rouses herself. What has become of the coach, the castle, the servants? Nothing but a strange force remains the same. She's jolted along the rude hurdle, seated on rushes, and a tall, big-boned man in rags sits in front, kicking with his heel the ill-favored beast that pulls him along, every bone of which sticks out, and holding the halter which serves for reins. They stop at the door of a miserable building, loose stone, with its thatch so sunk and rotten that the roof tree couples protrude crooked at corners, like the bones of a wretched horse, with enormous head and ears that drag them to the door. The long, gaunt man gets down, his sinister face grim like his hands. At the same grimy giant who had accosted her on the lonely road near Dead Man's Crike, but she feels that she must go through with it now. She follows him into the house. 2 rushlights were burning in a large and miserable room. Before his ragged bed lay a woman groaning piteously. "That is Lady Laredale," says the gaunt dark man, who began to stride up and down, but rolling his head, stamping furiously and thumping one hand on the palm of the other, talking and laughing at the corners where there was no one visible to hear or answer. Old Mall Clark recognized the starved creature who lay in the bed, all dark now and grimy as the man, looking as though she has never in her life washed hands or face, once blithe, pretty, large. The hideous being who was her mate continued in the same odd fluctuations of fury, grief, and merriment, and whenever she uttered a groan, he parried it with another, as Mother Cartridge thoughts, and saturn derision. At length he strode into another room, and banged the door after him. In due time the poor woman's pains were over, and a daughter was born. Such an imp, with long pointed ears, flat nose, and enormous restless eyes and mouth, consistently began to yell and talk in some unknown language, at the noise of which the father looked into the room, and told the sage femme that she would not go unrewarded. The sick woman seized the moment of his absence to say in the ear of
If you had not come for work tonight, he would not have fetched you. Take no more than your rightful fee, or he'll keep you here.
At this moment he returned with a bag of gold and silver coins, which he emptied on the table and told her to help herself. She took 4 shillings, which was her primitive fee, neither more nor less, and all his urgency could not prevail with her to take a farthing more. He looked so terrible at her refusal that she rushed out the door, and she ran after him. "You'll take your money with you!" He snatched at the bag, still half full, and flung it at her. It lighted on her shoulder, and partly from the blow, partly from the terror, she fell to the ground. And when she came to herself, it was morning. She was lying across her own doorstep. It is said that she never more foretold or practiced spells. And though all that happened 60 years ago or more, our Silver Bell, wise folk think, is still living, and will continue to do so to the day of doom. Okay. Fairy tale. Where am I? Why am I invisible? Oh, there we go. I'd forgotten I'd faded myself out earlier. Yeah. So during the last break, I'd actually switched phones I was using for my connection, so I think that helped. Let's see who might be on. Unless anyone has any suggestions. I'm always open for suggestions of people. A couple of people on my friends list are on. Let's see, readers though. Let's see who might be reading. Okay. Not sure if anyone wants to go to a Bible reading, especially after me just reading tales about witches and fairies. The other one is reading a book on Baldur's Gate. Check ASMR is on. Maybe not. Let's see if this one's. I don't know. We've got 261 views. Some Melissa's listed, so it's sleeping, but she's on. Again, if anyone has a suggestion, let's come on. Oh, okay. Oh, Megan. I'm not really seeing him. So I think I may just ink. So thank you everyone for coming in for frightful fairy tales. And I guess I will see you hopefully in the future. Have a good night. Tuck you in, warm within, keep you free from sin.